How do you think your Jewish heritage has impacted your life?
I always thought about religion when I was young, about keeping you in your place. You know, like there's a greater cause or the universal moral golden rules. I really value the tradition and honoring my family and my father. So my dad, as you know, survived World War II, and he didn't talk about it as a kid at all. He never, actually, if there was a TV show on World War II, he'd come in and turn it off. And we're in the back seat of a car driving from New York to Connecticut. My mom was asleep in the front seat. And I'm like, Dad, you ever kill anyone? And he did. He shot 2 German soldiers. And I was like, he must have been like 14 or 15. He never was in a camp. He just fought with the partisans against the Germans. And at one point, he left Czechoslovakia, and he was living in the mountains in caves. Nobody knew he was Jewish, so he'd go play with the German guards soccer during the day. They thought he was adorable, so they'd play soccer with him, and then he'd go back into the hills, and at night he'd come down into the village and exchange stuff that women made for food. And then he walked into a bar one night when he came down, and there were 2 German soldiers that had stayed behind in the village, and he and his friend, they just shot them right then and there. They were going to die, so they shot them. And then they spent the whole night cleaning up the bar, because the Germans figured out that this village had killed 2 German soldiers. They would have torched the town. So he skied down to these villages with pine branches on his back, so they would erase the tracks. And they disposed of the bodies and stuff, but I can't even imagine. I mean, he's a teenager, and he was so weak when the Russians liberated him that he couldn't even pick up a gun. He was drinking the oil from the gun, like they were drinking that, mixing it with water, which I don't think is something that you'd do today. But again, it was 2 different lives for him, and he wanted to insulate his kids from anything. It wasn't until I was 38 that I really talked to him about the war.
When you took him to Poland?
We walked to the back room of this museum, and in this glass case in the back was a book like this big, this thick on each side, and it was open to a page of the resistance fighters. And my father's name was in the book. And it was like open to that page. And I was like, holy mackerel. It was an unbelievable moment in my life. And
It touches you even right now, thinking about it.
I mean, I can't even imagine what his youth was like. And I think, for me, it was really about, it made me tough, my worst day was better than his best day. And he was tough. He had a temper growing up.
Like in what ways?
Well, he threw a plate of eggs in my face. And, he would hit me with a belt, as a kid. My mom was a school teacher. We grew up in a tiny little house in Long Island, actually, until I was 2. Then we moved to Connecticut. But I remember that if I broke something, I'd just sort of hide.
The road trips you guys would take to Florida, and what would happen when he would get worked up?
That'd be an understatement. But yeah, we were driving down, and my dad would inevitably get into fights with my mom. And my dad would get out of the car. We're in the middle of South Carolina, and start walking. And he'd walk for like 20 miles. My mom, get in the car, Mark. And he's like, no! One time he was moving, we were sitting in we had a colonial little house in Stamford, Connecticut. And my mom wanted him to move this coffee table. And he was moving it, he moved it like 3, I was sitting on the stairs watching him do this. And about the 5th time she asked him to move it, she couldn't decide which room to put the table in. He stood up, he picked it up, and he dropped it and smashed it into 1,000 pieces in the middle of the corridor. So, it's okay. I mean, it's funny, because today you're supposed to ask your children, how did they feel? What made them act that way? Like, what's the deeper meaning of their misbehavior? That wasn't part of my growing up. My dad was pretty strict. You did what you were supposed to do. You did your chores and you did your errands, and my mom would give me a penny if I behaved at the supermarket so I could buy bubble gum. It was like, I don't think there was anything particularly wrong with the way I was brought up, but it's certainly not the way anyone's brought up today.
Your father's bankruptcy, your most vivid memory of that would be what?
My father was incredibly proud, but I knew he was very hurt by the bankruptcy and very embarrassed. But again, he kept it all pretty close to the chest. And only when my father got older did he really become more emotional, and we could see that, I think he got very sensitive as he got older. He was probably always sensitive, he just never showed it. Mm-hmm. So I think I'll never forget, we took him to see Schindler's List. And that was almost like a coming out party for him. I mean, after that, he was willing to talk about the war. And the kids, my kids, found him to be sort of an amazing man. And so he'd go speak at schools. And I think he enjoyed telling the story and teaching kids about the time period. And, you know, he was, like I said, he was an engineer at heart. And he was super proud of his children. And I think he really loved the United States. And he really was a believer. It was the American dream. You can do anything you want if you work hard. And I know he really loved this country and the opportunities it could give you if you invested in yourself. And I think that was probably his biggest gift to me, was like, there's no stopping. You can do whatever you want, but you got to work.